Welcome everybody to our Tuesday edition of Let's Do Lunch. On Tuesdays, we always focus on the topic of the future of entertainment. And we have a really spectacular show for you today, which I'll introduce in just a moment. First off, just a reminder that we love to know who's here today. So please introduce yourselves in the chat. It's on the bottom nav. And when you go to the chat, make sure to put the drop down on all panelists and attendees so that all of us can see your introductions and posts. And you're welcome to put comments in the chat during the show. We love getting some activity going with the audience. And also, if you have questions for the panel, please put them in the Q&A area, which is just to the left of the chat, so that it's easy for our panelists to see your intros. So our show today has been put together by our good friends at Grant Thornton. If you guys attended the last show that we did, it was really great. And I expect nothing less than the same here for this show today. I'll introduce our panelists. The topic first off is marketing to the power of X. And the X in that title is a reference to our friends at AUDIENCEX. So please welcome Brian Coe and Jason Wolfson from AUDIENCEX. Welcome, Brian. Welcome, Jason. Great to have you guys on the show. And moderating the panel today is Deborah Newman, who is National Media and Entertainment Leader from Grant Thornton. Deborah, great to have you back.
Thanks, Ned. Great to be here.
Have a great show, everybody.
Thank you. So hi, everybody. So happy to be here with you today. I am Deborah Newman, and I lead Grant Thornton's media and entertainment practice. And just briefly about Grant Thornton, because sometimes that name might not be known or you may be familiar, but we provide professional services in the tax, audit, and advisory realm. And so we are a professional services provider. So we get to work with a lot of very great companies. And one of those great companies is AUDIENCEX. And so I'm joined here by one of the founding members who is Jason Wolfson. So Jason, if you could wave and say hi.
Hey guys, great to be here. Thank you, Deborah.
Sure. And AUDIENCEX's Chief Commercial Officer, Brian Coe.
Hello, everybody. Nice to be here.
So we're going to have a very interesting discussion, and AUDIENCEX is really at the pinnacle of entertainment and digital advertising. And that industry is just going through rapid transformation. So weekend headlines, you know, AT&T, Warner Media Discovery, we hear about Amazon and MGM, and the news just keeps coming. So major transformation, major branding, major marketing impacts across this entire industry. So before I hand you over to Jason, I just wanted to give you guys some information about AUDIENCEX. So they have been consistently recognized over the last 3 years as one of the fastest growing companies in America. So they've received accolades from Inc., Deloitte, the Financial Times, and the Los Angeles Business Journal. They are in the marketing space, digital, and they're really at the pinnacle of digital marketing and technology, and they work extensively in the entertainment space. Their company is built around their proprietary trading desk, which is a multi-platform performance solution where they combine their deep strategic expertise to accelerate growth for their brand and agency clients. So Jason, it would be great for you to introduce your company. Let us know, you know, why and how did you find it? How was it founded? What's your vision for the future? And so it would be great to meet you and hear all about AUDIENCEX.
Well, first of all, thank you, Ned, so much for the introduction and the generous invitation to participate. Deborah, similarly to you, both Brian and myself are thrilled to be a part of the discussion today. And I will tell everybody gathered that there's no question in my mind that Deborah is one of the most dynamic and knowledgeable voices in the media and entertainment landscape. So thrilled to be a part of this, Deborah. Thank you for making this happen. Appreciate very much the invitation. And also the kind words about AUDIENCEX. I like Pinnacle. Thank you. I'm going to use that. So as Deborah mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders. There's two of us at AUDIENCEX. I do consider myself a serial entrepreneur in the digital space. That term has a little bit of a romantic resonance to it, but as I've learned, and I suspect many of the people on this call have learned as well, it's a very long and very arduous road. Certainly in the digital landscape, that's true, and certainly not for the faint of heart. But that being said, at Deborah's suggestion, I'm going to just trace back the roots of our company a little bit, as I think it's valuable background and valuable context. So our journey as a company began in the late 90s, back in the 20th century, when television was really at the center of literally every ad campaign. And we were a broadcast commercial production company. Through a combination of luck and probably a little bit too much chutzpah, we partnered with a company called Vizio in the early 2000s and helped with their launch. And over the span of just a few short years, less than 5, they were able to scale from 3 million to 3 billion, along the way outperforming legacy brands like Sony, Samsung, Sharp, Panasonic. And in the process, they literally introduced the American consumer to an entirely new category, which is the HDTV. Today, Vizio is a leading HDTV brand in North America, but their growth was an opportunity for us to scale our own company. And we shifted quite quickly from a singular focus on broadcast to layer in additional elements like creative strategy and eventually media services. So as Vizio grew, so did our own company. We acquired a lot of different customers, first of all in consumer electronics, of course, and then stretching into other verticals as well. Including, by the way, the entertainment space. We worked very extensively with a number of leading studios, networks, cable companies. In the early 2000s, unsurprisingly, we pivoted into digital through a series of acquisitions that we made in programmatic, search, and social. And today, the company that Brian and I are a part of, AUDIENCEX, is heavily focused on ad tech. We run the largest independent trading desk for performance marketers, and our customers are agencies and brands, many of the largest in the world. Now, at the center of our sort of strategic point of view, if you will, as a company, and this is what I want to focus on because I think it connects quite elegantly to the subject of today's webinar, the entertainment space, of course, we do spend a lot of time talking about two broad themes, omni-channel and full funnel. Now, why is this important to today's conversation? Well, I think everybody on this call, I suspect, understands that what used to be considered a very linear acquisition, customer journey, purchase funnel is really fundamentally an outdated way of thinking about customer acquisition. The purchase journey, if you like, today is entirely non-linear. It's multidimensional. It covers, every conceivable digital touch point. And so the marketer, if they want to be effective, needs to build much more of a holistic communications plan that thinks in an integrated way about really every facet of the acquisition journey, not just this linear sequence from awareness to consideration to conversion, but rather a media plan or media activation that connects with consumers in hopefully meaningful ways, pretty much across the entire spectrum of the digital ecosystem. So what this means practically is that upper funnel, mid funnel, and lower funnel strategies have essentially converged. And historically, which is why I mentioned our roots in broadcast television, content storytelling occupied really only the broadest part of the funnel, awareness and visibility. Now we think about content as being inherently linked to strategies that drive conversion at the mid and lower part of the funnel. So we're seeing, and Brian and I talk about this a lot, a convergence, a blurring of lines, if you will, that have historically separated performance from brand marketing and content from data and tech. And the reason this is deeply relevant to the entertainment space is because entertainment delivers the most powerful content experiences. And content moving forward is going to be at the very center of every marketer's strategy that's focused on acquisition, customer acquisition, and more importantly, actually data acquisition. And data acquisition is a critical point that I think Brian and I want to spend some time talking about. So entertainment sits at this nexus point between content, storytelling, if you like, data and tech. It used to be thought about as, we heard terms like branded entertainment, co-marketing between sort of consumer brands and entertainment brands. But today, content is really fundamentally reclaiming its place, I would say, alongside data and tech as the centerpiece of any performance campaign or brand campaign for that matter. So we're really seeing a return to creative, what Brian and I refer to actually as creative tech, which is built around very unique principles today. So real-time data and actually dynamic response. Content is becoming an increasingly key performance driver, a very crucial piece in terms of how we achieve data aggregation, data acquisition. And what I think we're going to focus a lot of time on today, the role of content in a post-cookie ecosystem. We'll unpack what that means, although I suspect many of you already have clarity around this. Content is going to be, and it's in fact now becoming in the latter part of this year and into the early part of next year, the crucial tactic by which marketers can build opt-in first-party audiences. So we'll come back to that in a little bit. So those are some of the shifts that we're seeing at a macro level. I just want to speak briefly about some of the specific tech shifts that we've seen that I think have deep relevance for the entertainment space. And I think that can provide some useful context for the conversation that Deborah framed up. So number one, obviously the emergence of streamers as the de facto platforms of the future. We've seen heavy acceleration in cord cutting across, I would say every demo, certainly since the start of the pandemic. We've seen essentially the disappearance of theatrical as a standalone window. HBO Max, I think, is the central example of this. We've seen the rise of programmatic TV or addressable TV, or what we call connected TV, replacing linear television. Industry consolidation, as Deborah pointed out, just this weekend, we saw AT&T's decision with respect to Warner Media and Discovery. So a new streaming kind of giant to challenge Netflix and Disney. We're also seeing ad-supported models with streamers, AVOD, cost-conscious consumers willing to accept ad-supported platform experiences via paid subscriptions. Of course, 5G and enhanced connectivity, I think, is crucial to any conversation about the future of ad tech, entertainment. And finally, most obviously, the impact of the pandemic. What sort of post-pandemic lift are we going to see? And to what extent are these behaviors or paradigm shifts going to be permanent as opposed to transient? We're also going to see an entirely new paradigm that the pandemic will introduce, and I'm going to touch on some of those points later this morning. So unpacking each of these is a larger conversation, and as I said, I think Deborah will steer the conversation in the direction of some of them. But I really wanted to use these opening comments to try to build as much connection as possible between the things that we do as an advertising and marketing technology company and the entertainment space, which is shifting both in ways that are linked and ways that are unique to the entertainment space. So I'm going to hand this back to Deborah, but hopefully this has been a useful prologue to a more specific discussion around some of these shifts and the extent to which they're going to be transformational in terms of how entertainment, advertising, and advertising tech come together.
Yep. Very helpful, and I want to encourage our audience. There is the Q&A function, so if you do have any questions, feel free to put your question in there. We are monitoring that. And I thought that was very helpful, Jason, that parallel between, the creativity these days, right? So it's about creating content, but in the digital advertising space. So how are you going to capture those eyeballs, the interests? And we have such diverse interests, and consumers are looking for that experiential that resonates with them. And interestingly enough, that was something we talked about on the last webinar, is kind of the user demands today. Generic doesn't work. It has to be tailored for your niche audiences. So very, very helpful, and we'll definitely touch on a number of the points that you mentioned. And by the way, you can see your sons in the back. It was something we were talking about, the pitfalls of working at home with the kids running around from school. I've got construction going on next door, so and we've all learned how to be patient in this new digital environment.
Well, I've delighted my teenagers make a cameo appearance. Thanks for pointing that out, Deborah.
You're welcome. The audience saw it already. So you touched on something very, very important. That's where I want to turn the attention over to Brian. So we're increasingly moving towards, a cookieless world. So you've got consumer privacy concerns, you have a number of laws and regulations that are popping up. And in fact, you, the consumer, can opt out of, cookie tracking. So that really changes up the dynamics. And so, Brian, it would be great to hear from you. One, introduce yourself and anything you want to say about you, and then help us understand this cookieless world and what that means for your company and this industry.
Sure. Thanks, Deborah, for that introduction. And also, Ned and Dew, thanks for invitation. Pleasure to be part of this conversation today. So just a brief introduction about myself. We all know Warren Buffett as the Oracle of Omaha. So with a title like mine, Chief Commercial Officer, my role in essence is to be the Oracle for AUDIENCEX, Oracle of Marina del Rey, shall I say. I started my first few years out of school in management consulting and shortly fell in love with the world of entertainment and advertising. Those 80-hour work weeks behind false glamour and dreams. Thereafter, I spent many years trapped within the walls of global holding company agency giants like WPP, Omnicom, IPG, and I loved every single minute of it, actually. Then came something called the Internet of Things, and I was automatically gravitated by all things ad tech and how technology is being infused with the world of entertainment and advertising. Eventually, this pathway led to opportunities for me to drive growth and revenue for demand side and data management platform giants like Turn and global supply side powerhouse like Teads. Finally, this ever-changing landscape led me to connect and partner with an old friend and industry visionary, Jason, to bring the enterprise ad tech solutions to the mid-market and brands and agencies. So one of the reasons I love about this industry is that we get to live and build a new industry every couple of months. At least I feel that way. The anticipated cookie deprecation is one of those inflection points in our industry where everyone at AUDIENCEX gets to be a part of in this transformational shift. Many marketers and agencies are fearful of possible negative impact the cookieless world will bring. AUDIENCEX's unofficial motto is challenges bring opportunities. In 2020, through the pandemic year, we helped our clients not only survive, but thrive. Ad tech players are busy formulating solutions to replicate cookies. Some see UID or universal ID to replicate targeting abilities while complying with data and privacy regulations. Marketers and publishers have been busy building out solutions to utilize their first-party data to engage and predictably build a lookalike audiences. And content producers are betting on the contextual targeting to make a comeback and make engagement points that are more interactive and relevant. The positioning of AUDIENCEX as a tech-agnostic trading desk allows us to adapt and house all of these viable solutions for marketers in the post-cookie world. The way we see it, it's not a one solution or one tech that's going to replace the cookie. It will be a combination of all those things. So, as Jason had pointed out earlier, we've seen the rise of channels like connected TV, because consumers' behaviors have shifted. And unfortunately, with the whole anticipated cookieless or cookie deprecation rather, those channels will have little impact to cookies going away and targeting abilities. So I'm more excited than ever before in our ability to lead, grow, and help scale this category.
Very cool, and thank you, Brian, very much. And it is indeed shifting, and that is an interesting perspective. It's like we're all reinventing ourselves every couple of months, you know, as this industry shifts. The other thing I can't help but to notice, right? I feel like you guys are here at the perfect time with the pandemic, right? And I would like to ask that next, and we do have a great question from the audience, and I'll be asking that shortly. But just, you know, up until March 2020, we went to in-person events. We went, you know, to live sporting events. We went to theaters. We went to concerts. And while some of that's coming back, this past, you know, year has been a significant shift. And so I'm just curious, generally, how has this pandemic impacted how you market, how you, you know, get to your audiences? And I mean, I'm going to leave it open to whether it would be Brian or Jason, you guys, but I'm very curious about that impact.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to kick it off, and I'm sure Brian will have additional thoughts that he'd like to share. I think it's impossible to talk about the pandemic without talking also about the sorry about the ambient noise, without talking also about data privacy. And I think the last 18 months or so have coincided with shifts with respect to data privacy, the regulatory environment, and ways in which people are engaging online. And the two have come together in a very, very meaningful way. So it's impossible for AUDIENCEX or any other company in this space to talk about customer acquisition, the pandemic, without also thinking about data privacy and that regulatory environment. And I think the two have accelerated one another. And as Brian mentioned correctly, of course, we are preparing for the elimination by Google's Chrome browser of the tracking cookie that has really been the centerpiece of how marketers have leveraged third-party data to reach and engage and convert audiences. So Google is the most dominant player in advertising. They're going to end their support fully for the third-party cookie sometime in the beginning of 2022, as Brian mentioned. If you take Google's public position on this, it's very much about restoring an industry-wide effort, I would say, to restore a trust, public trust around data transparency when consumers are online. Others have suggested that it's a more cynical initiative, strategic initiative by Google to steal or capture or grow market share. Irrespective of where you fall on that continuum, it does fundamentally mean that the entire ad tech ecosystem is going to need to completely rethink how it reaches and engages audiences, which I think, Deborah, is really what you're touching on. So this has produced massive uncertainty for everyone, certainly for ourselves as well. I would say doubt, fear, vulnerability, anxiety, these are all the characteristics that we see in the space, in the lunarscape, if you will. And it's deeply relevant to the entertainment space as well. So most of the anxiety, however, I would say is fueled by ad tech companies, data companies, publishers. These are the ones that have the most at stake. So publishers stand to lose massive margins on the value of their inventory. Data companies are going to lose a crucial signal, if you will, that is the underpinning of their entire identity solution. And ad tech point solutions themselves are going to see a very significant reduction in data footprint. I would ask the question, what does it mean for advertisers, entertainment advertisers and others? And we work with marketers across literally every vertical. So I think a big idea that I want to suggest is that content is going to play and this is germane to Deborah's larger question around the pandemic, content is going to play an increasingly important role in helping build and expand first-party data sets. Third-party data sets are going to be harder to activate and deploy, will require first-party activation by marketers. And those who generate premium content, entertainment companies in particular, are going to find themselves, I think, at the center of this emerging ecosystem on the other side of the disappearance of the cookie. Audiences are going to need to be built with opt-in authentication as kind of prerequisites to engagement. Otherwise, the regulatory framework will impede our ability to connect with those audiences. So for marketers, the question is, what are some of the digital tactics available to them that can drive performance without being able to activate the cookie? And there's many of them. So the closed ecosystems, Google in particular, Amazon, Facebook, Pinterest, Snap, Twitter, these are all logged in environments that work seamlessly without cookies. Brian mentioned CTV, OTT. These are platforms that work entirely without the cookie. They work on inherent authentication protocols, device IDs, that kind of stuff, IP addresses. Digital audio, podcasts, for example, these are all cookieless platforms. And a lot of publishers, many of whom we work with, also have very strong first-party data assets that they can deliver to marketers via private marketplaces. So there's a lot of digital tactics available to marketers seeking to deliver performance outcomes during this pandemic, on the other side of the pandemic. While third-party cookies are going away, as Brian mentioned, third-party data, however, isn't going anywhere. So there's still a lot of online and actually offline data that marketers can activate with the recognition that they're going to need to link and think about attribution in a fundamentally different way. So cohort-based targeting is what Google's really leaning into, as well as companies like Verizon. We've seen the UID 2.0 from the Trade Desk. There's other universal IDs that are coming from players like LiveRamp, Marco Lotame, and others. Contextual data, which is actually how we used to market before we were able to access third-party data. This is targeting based on content rather than an individual. And I think we're going to see a tremendous lift in how performance marketers leverage the power of contextual. You know, the final thing I'll say around this is that, you know, the third-party cookie, which we're preparing to say goodbye to, has really always been an imperfect solution. We have deep affection. Our entire business model is predicated upon our ability to activate the third-party cookie. But it really helps us think about devices rather than people. And it has built-in anonymity, and I think that's the crucial reason why this type of advertising is going away and why consumers are so resistant to being tracked in this manner. So what emerges on the other side of, you know, the start of 2020, you know, 2022 is going to be identity driven. It's not going to be anonymized data driven. These are going to be very powerful identifiers that marketers can use. They'll be more stable, they'll be more accurate, and they're going to provide fundamentally richer signals that we can use to personalize messaging and, of course, optimize spend. So I think, Deborah, to your question, the pandemic and the deprecation of the third-party cookie can't be thought about separately. And there's a lot of opportunity for marketers to be able to think differently, to reimagine how they engage and convert audiences at the start of next year.
Very helpful. And then I'm just going to check in, Brian, is there anything you want to add to what Jason just said?
No, Jason has articulated that really well. You know, it's interesting we obviously in our industry use the word ad tech as one word, but it's actually convergence of two words, right? Advertising and tech. Technology is there's a sort of the tone of commodity, and it's very it's not necessarily human. You eliminate those human aspect of it. And then advertising, at least traditionally from the golden ages of advertising, it's very much a experiential and human sort of emotional driven sort of the word or practice. So it's interesting we kind of merge the two words together, ad tech. So I think to Jason's point, I think we kind of gone through the period where everything was very commoditized and everything was very data specific or targeting driven. And I think the next phase, what this means is really at the end of the day, positive experience for the consumers. Consumers have the choice whether to opt in to interact if they see this as being relevant, or opt out. And also it's at the burden of marketers and entertainers to bring content, creative messaging, entertaining, visuals that's going to be relevant for these individuals. So I think that's what it's all about. And I'm again really excited about how it's been progressing and evolving, because we're really bringing the positive experiences back to the consumers.
Very helpful. So I've actually got two great audience questions that are related specifically to what we're talking about right now. So Todd Robinson asks, what strategies and methods are brands considering to capture more eyeballs? Are there any patterns you are seeing across brand initiatives?
Brian, I'm going to hand that off to you, and then I'll add some color.
Sure. It's a great question. So, creating meaningfully driven performance and capturing eyeballs is never an easy task, especially when the words like privacy and consumer choice, and all those things are at the center of the conversation. And as I mentioned earlier, the challenges always presents an opportunity. So, we think in the next phase of our evolution, specifically sort of the cookie deprecation world, that means we're putting more creative, we need to be more creative with our creative and messaging, as I mentioned. Marketers need to resonate with consumers. It needs to be entertaining. It needs to, again, think about the individual user experience. And these omni-channel tactics that AUDIENCEX has been deploying on behalf of marketers is not necessarily going away, but it's to add the positive experiences back. So the mass awareness tactics or channels like CTV is still there. The traditional mediums that we are used to, whether it's the outdoor, now digital outdoor, of course, or even linear TV, all those are in the mix for advertisers and entertainers to utilize. What's going to be interesting again is how do we bring these relevant messaging to the individuals that's going to resonate, right? So, it's bringing the creative messaging that's going to be individualized and add positive experience that's going to add positive brand initiatives for marketers.
That's great. Very helpful perspective. And Jason, were you going to add anything?
No, I think Brian captured it very well. I mean, I might suggest, just revisiting a theme that we touched on earlier, this notion of full funnel. At AUDIENCEX, we focus very heavily on paid media, but there's also owned and earned as areas of tactical impact. And so we've always tried very emphatically to think about the relationship between paid, the degree to which it can yield insights about audience definition, audience acquisition, audience engagement, audience conversion, and the extent to which that can inform how marketers are thinking about content as part of their owned or earned strategies, in particular owned. Similarly, there's a relationship that goes the other way. How can content that marketers are generating be deployed organically so that the paid parts of a communications mix can learn from audience response, audience reaction, audience engagement. So we try to think in a very multifaceted way about data learnings that can be aggregated across really every facet of the broader communications mix. You know, I think a larger theme of today's conversation is really about the power of content. Content is historically how you drive awareness and visibility, but in particular, content is how you drive mid-funnel engagement, mid-funnel activation. So, you know, in answer to the question that was asked, I think content is going to play an increasingly significant role. And it's not just any content. To Brian's point, it has to be deeply meaningful content that has specific resonance for specific audience segments. Those learnings can be achieved by measurement and attribution once owned content is deployed. It can also be informed and shaped by learnings from the paid media piece. So deeply thinking about synergies between paid and owned and earned, which, you know, we tend to think about as public relations, that kind of stuff, I think is critical for marketers who are looking to drive conversion events. I did suggest earlier, and I'll just resurface the thought, that we no longer really think about a classical distinction between performance and brand marketing. We're seeing very fundamentally a convergence. And there are several reasons for this. I think in the economic macro context of the pandemic, brand marketers have had to think about deployment of media dollars in a more conservative way and do so in a way that's measurable. It's difficult to the same degree to measure brand attributes as it is to measure conversion or performance type attributes. So we see brand marketers having to adopt a lot of the strategic ideas, conceptual frameworks, if you will, and conversion metrics that we've been working with for years in the performance space. So that blurring between a distinction between performance and brand marketers, I think, is a really useful conceptual framework. Similarly, between owned and paid. And finally, I think that distinction, or that kind of distinction, is really valuable when thinking about the relationship between first and third-party data.
So on the idea of content and kind of where we are globally right now, there's a lot of social and political issues. So without going into obviously any details, but I'm curious, because what we've seen is if you take a certain position, right? So you could be an organization, you could be a brand, and you know, you could alienate a large part of the audience, call it, if your position is viewed as not on their side. So I'm just curious, not specifically about, of course, any political or social issues, but how much that plays into the conversation today, right? So you're meeting with a client, you guys are talking about the strategy, you're going to develop a campaign. I'm just curious how much kind of that social political realm is playing into these conversations today.
Yeah, I can take that. I mean, it's something we care about deeply as an organization, and we've always tried to align ourselves with impact organizations, social enterprise companies, obviously nonprofits. We have a pretty thriving pro bono practice. But I would say that I've noticed, and I'm sure others in this conversation today have noticed exactly the same thing, which is that in the past, I think organizations were very siloed in how they thought about impact and how they thought about more traditional business metrics. And impact was really to one side. Impact was adjacent to, impact was complementary to the more conventional business metrics that companies are trying to drive: revenue, EBITDA, customer acquisition, lead generation, et cetera. Today, and I think this is broadly a function of the pandemic and some of the sort of societal shifts around impact that we've seen, businesses are recognizing that you can't now separate, and that it's crucial for businesses to understand that impact and aligning with impact has a genuine effect on driving lift across the more conventional business metrics that owners, founders, et cetera, think about each and every day. For companies not to do this, represents a real threat. And I think business owners, business leaders, thought leaders, et cetera, finally recognize that there's a very meaningful reciprocal lift. When companies lean into impact, they are able to develop deeper, more meaningful relationships with their customers. And it fundamentally impacts the business metrics, bottom line, et cetera, that they care about most. So, you know, from our standpoint as a company, as a strategic advisory, as partners for performance agencies and brands, we're always looking at elegant ways to introduce impact into a messaging framework, into brand identity, into how we talk about value prop, how we talk about competitive differentiation. If there's ways to align that with impact, we think there's going to be a very fundamental lift from the standpoint of, you know, bottom line business metrics. So it's something we're looking at very carefully, and we've seen an emergence really just in the last 6 months or so of what I would call social enterprise type companies, which really, I think, embody this in a very powerful way. These aren't nonprofits. These are companies that recognize that impact and commerce can coexist very elegantly together. We work with a company, for example, called Coral Vita, that is the largest onshore coral farm in the world, based in Freeport, Grand Bahama. And their initial inception was as a nonprofit, but they've shifted to a for-profit model because they recognize that coral restoration, which is the larger task, also can have a huge impact from the standpoint of ecotourism, from the standpoint of preserving at-risk coastal environments in island nations all over the world. So you'd think that coral farming, coral restoration would fundamentally fit within a nonprofit category, but we're discovering that there's a very powerful synergy between a impact and enterprise model, and when the two come together, we're seeing enormous growth. And I think Coral Vita is an interesting example of that.
I mean, really, go ahead, Brian.
Apologies. So also we're seeing this hand raisers more from our clients, actually. So as Jason mentioned, these sort of socially driven campaigns were an afterthought to a lot of these global brands because it was the right thing to do, because, you know, it made sense. But now, you know, these impact for profit initiatives are becoming more and more sort of center of discussion. Jason and I recently were in a conversation with an amazing company who does a lot of these things on behalf of, you know, some of the largest global companies, and they are being asked by their clients to lead these initiatives for brands overall, not specifically for political or socially relevant topics, but on behalf of their, you know, brand initiatives, to be the center of kind of the next campaign, et cetera. So we definitely think there's an imminent shift that has already started and happened. And I think, you know, these socially and politically driven campaigns are no longer siloed, but they'll be merged as one, what is right for these brands. Again, going back to the consumers, because this is what the consumers are expecting and wanting from their experiences.
Yeah, really helpful. And I think we're at this, just the cusp, right, of what these audiences and consumers are expecting, where they want to be able to associate with a brand that has a cause similar to them or resonates with their way of thinking. So very helpful. So we're down to our last 6 minutes. There was another question that came in, and this was from Howard Hominoff. And it's going back to the loss of cookies. What are marketers most worried about with the loss of cookies? Is it poor data quality or just inertia of the business? And just maybe touching briefly so that we'll have time also to do our conclusion and thoughts.
Sure. I'd be happy to kind of start this, and I'm sure Jason will have a ton of great things to add. But, you know, it's not so much the loss of data as in, I think it's the habit that ad tech and marketers have formed around cookies. You know, it didn't necessarily was the right thing to do, but this was one of the early on solutions when all things browser and internet sort of came about. And these pieces of code made sense for a marketer to utilize and follow, track, and thus target. So I think this has been in practice for many years. And so I think marketers today have sort of become reliant on this practice. It wasn't necessarily the best positive user experience driven method, but it was, again, method that we all sort of felt comfortable with. I think this is the biggest shift that we're going through, where people are creatures of habit. We hate change in general. I heard, recently I heard somebody say, ad tech as an industry is like a cockroach. We'll find a way to survive, regardless of the changes we go through. So I think, some of this huge changes we're going through right now is actually a really, really positive one, ultimately for consumers. And I think we're going to find the ways to make sure that business don't suffer because of this. But again, just adding the positive sort of experience can only come out of it. So I don't think there will be a huge loss of it, rather than putting the right practices in place with the right use of data while protecting the individuals of their privacy and their user experience.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I'll just add a couple of thoughts. I think you covered a lot of what's really crucial here. Hopefully I did as well a little bit earlier. So I think there's a real distinction between the largest brands in the world, maybe the Fortune 100 or the Fortune 500. These are organizations, many of the largest entertainment companies in the world, for example, would fit into this category, that already have built very large, very actionable first-party data audiences, opt-in, fully authenticated. And so these are audiences that these companies can market to at greater velocity on the other side of the third-party cookies demise at the start of next year. For advertisers outside of this cohort, it potentially represents more of a challenge. They're going to have to rethink customer acquisition, and they're not going to be able to rely upon acquiring third-party data audiences through DMPs, et cetera. They're going to have to tactically adjust and tactically evolve so that first-party opt-in authenticated audiences will be part of their ongoing omni-channel strategy. And that's really what we've been leaning into heavily as a company, is starting to think about different strategic frameworks that will enable marketers to do that successfully. Thankfully, as a platform solutions company with the multi-platform trading desk, we feel we have a lot of agility, if you will, to use an overused term perhaps, to react and respond. We are in the business of innovation and disruption. We do own some of our own proprietary tech, but generally we're in the business of licensing or reimagining other people's tech into a holistic kind of platform solution. So many companies are thinking deeply about this each and every moment of 2021, and we're seeing a tremendous amount of progress, where I'm convinced, I think Brian is as well, that what will emerge on the other side of this will be an open internet that goes a good way toward restoring the faith and trust of the digital consumer in a fully transparent, fully regulated data framework, where they can engage online without some of this sense of data vulnerability or data intrusion. So we predict a vastly improved user experience, and we think we can translate that into vastly improved customer acquisition strategies. We think we're very well positioned for this. It isn't the case for everybody, but thankfully, we've been investing a lot of our internal resources. It's really our North Star this year, and thinking about how to become the leading performance solution for marketers in a post-cookie ecosystem.
So very helpful, and I actually think that those are great concluding thoughts. We are a minute before our committed end time with Ned. This conversation, it went so quick, very engaging, and so interesting. And I think it has ramifications for the entire industry. And of course, all industries, because everyone is dependent upon advertising, marketing, reaching their audience. And it's all digital these days, primarily. So I really, really appreciate both of you, Jason and Brian, for being here today. Hopefully somebody in the chat put, how you can be reached in terms of your website. I know you've got a couple of your team members on, so if someone hasn't done that, please add that to the chat. And Ned, I think we're at the end here. And again, Jason and Brian, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Deborah and Jason and Brian. We really enjoyed the conversation today. I'm glad that we have recorded it too, and that will be available to folks in the future. And Deborah, thanks again to your whole team at Grant Thornton for helping to put together the program today. Very well done, as always.